Bam.
This is John Spencer, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Man, we just invented this show like 10 minutes ago. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about conflict in general. I know we're going to talk about Israel, Hamas, Israel, Iran, and then we'll talk about, I guess, hope Azerbaijan, and then the current Indian conflict that you are getting ready to study up close. If anybody doesn't know John Spencer, go look up the Modern War Institute and you'll find out everything about him. I don't want to spend time there. I do want to start with misinformation and dissent, because dissent is probably different than misinformation. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing in the feeds in terms of news and opinion pieces on the current Israel et al. Conflict?
Yeah, it's very an onion of layers of disinformation. You have actual like state-backed old school disinformation that gets put out, and we've seen this even as of recently, where you have Israel going against Iran, Iran putting out disinformation about what has been hit and what they're going to do and things like that. But within the social media world, where I do get a lot of my information because it is faster than mainstream media, you see all the normal disinformation agents trying to
Mhm.
use the platform they've built over the last 2 or 3 years, either being anti-Ukraine, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, to use their platforms they built. And there are a list of these people trying to push disinformation on things that are pretty clear, uh, but it's so layered, and a lot of people are just not informed, so they'll take they want their 30-second bit of information, and then spread something. And there was something, like an Israeli jet had been down in Iran, and people would spread that as some type of plausible report, and it's like you couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah.
And it was happening when India and Pakistan were going at it. Pakistan was talking about like hundreds of losses. There's a difference for me from dissent. You're right, dissent to just not understanding. The
Yeah.
whole kind of the far fringes of our own political networks of you know right, left, isolationist, all this stuff. You have the dissent to like, oh, this is pulling us into another war forever, like all these things that are just misinformed. And I appreciate you and all of your work you do to cover things in detail.
Yeah. And that dissent I try to cover. I mean, I had Dr. Aaron Good, who's a political scientist, and we were talking, and he said that it's okay to be an anti-Semite, and he basically said if you're not an anti-Semite, you're wrong. And he means that in the sense of like, the anti-Zionist movement is really what he was saying, but that's like the sensational thing that you say. And here's a guy that studies this
Yeah.
stuff in
I,
depth, right? And
I don't
it's
agree with that at all. Just to put that out, like that's crazy. That's
yeah.
and actually what I've learned in studying the sheer root of the anti-Semitism. And I got to meet a guy in Israel, Natan Sharansky. Highly recommend his book. That was a Soviet Jew that was in Soviet prison for a long time for being basically for being Jewish, but also being a dissenter of the Soviet regime. But that this long held anti-Semitism that goes back to biblical times,
Mm,
that starts with a double standard, and we've seen that. Um, and then because of you have the one Jewish state, you have the delegitimizing Israel as a state, and then demonization of not just Israel but all the Jewish people. And we've seen that. I live very close to what recently happened in Boulder, where uh, just a crazy person makeshift flamethrower and burning Holocaust
right.
survivors who are just marching to not in any position for anybody other than to let the hostages in Gaza go. That's the root of this anti-Semitism has no limits, really.
Yeah, especially with this current conflict, a lot of folks are just desperate to raise their hand and say this. And I bring up Aaron because he did say something that's pretty sensational, and part of that is that's what you have to do to get attention these days. But he also is a critic of Israel, which, by the way, is part of the legitimate dissent in saying what Israel has or hasn't done over the whole course of this thing, because they're not an innocent actor. The U.S. isn't an innocent actor, but to put all of this on the back of the Israelis. I had a friend that put a post up very angry at Israel about the genocide in Hamas, that Hamas and Israel have caused ultimately in Palestine. And you've been really clear in this, talking about Israel's historic restraint and how they attempt to protect citizens. And then the other day we saw the Washington Post post something that as soon as they posted it, it's like, why would you post anything from the Palestinian Minister of Health. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been flawed so many times. They just purposefully stepped into that because there's no way they get that wrong still, but they did.
Yeah, this is so one. There's no genocide in Gaza, to be clear, and this inversion of the truth. As somebody, I bleed red, white, and blue, and we go way back. American veteran studying wars all around the world. The hate for Israel is very unique, and the
Mm,
spread of misinformation about Israel's actions from any war to include its short history as a nation, as a democratic nation, is very unique. But this inversion of the truth, even if you just take, although Israel's fighting a seven front war, and we're going to cover a couple, but you just take what's in Gaza, having now been there 5 times as a person who studies war all around the world, that inversion of what people think the IDF are doing, the inversion of what the United Nations says about Israel and the situation on the ground, the statistical lying that happens, and
right.
the misreporting, and trying to put Israel and Hamas on the same level, right? So like you said, taking Hamas numbers, Hamas statements, Hamas recording of events, first reports, everything, and putting that on the same level as a democratic nation of
Mm,
Israel, of a standing and with a moral ethical code. They're military like ours that follows a certain spirit and code, has military justice system. Just that the world trying to put them on the same stage, like Hamas does this and Israel does this, like that's a crazy inversion of reality
mm,
that is very unique to Israel. Not and we're gonna talk about multiple wars. It's not there in these other wars. It's very unique to people's already held, and like you said, people have made this, monetize this, right? So you have
mm,
actors like Jake Shields and um that's that kid, Candace Owens, all these people who are monetizing hate for the Jewish people, which
mm.
then they try to say, well, no, I like Jewish people, just not Zionists, which is
Right. Yeah.
the belief that you should have a one place, a one state, one nation for the Jewish people. But people are
Yeah.
monetizing hate, which has turned into violence on American campuses, American streets. I mean, we've
Yeah.
seen a 600% rise in
Mm.
attacks against Jewish people around the world. I mean, according to the ADL statistics, it's insane, Pete.
Yeah, it is insane, and just the free movement and it's the freedom of anybody who's Jewish in the states has been compromised. Now, I'm always big on saying this, so and I know you'll get this, but let me just slow down for the audience's sake. The specter of the problem is always bigger than the real problem, but the specter keeps you in your apartment in New York City because you're afraid of going out, even if you're as safe as you could be. You go to a dangerous place. You and I've been to combat zones. I'd drive around 100 times in a row and not a thing happens because it's not that dangerous, except for where it's dangerous. And then it's all the way dangerous. And so people are paralyzed by this fear. And whether that's partly them and their own, fear of things of the unknown or legitimate fear, gosh, how do they sort that out? Right. And so when we have these protests, everything, everybody's a right to protest. I'm all for it. There'll be protests all around the nation today. And I'm all for people exercising their political freedom. But when you start to keep someone in their house, when someone can't go to their classroom, when someone can't do some other thing because of this, then it crosses a line to where it becomes something worse than simply a protest.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the recklessness, right? Right. Israel's a democracy. You have dissent in Israel to what Israel
Sure.
does.
Right.
And of course, that is one of our democratic principles: free speech, free media, free press, all this. But when that freedom turns in, hides as hate speech, right? The
Mm,
globalized intifada, which is being, wearing and flying the flag of a terrorist organization who has the extinction of the Jewish people in American streets,
right.
which then leads to that. It's not an unfounded fear. It leads to real fear of Jewish Americans
Mm,
scared for good reason. You have a Jewish governor have his house burned down with a family inside of it. You have Israeli citizens, diplomats being shot in Washington D.C. Like so many events when these things like free Palestine from the river to the sea is calling for the extinction of Israel. globalized intifada is calling for attacking Jewish people all around the world, and for the naive to say no, that's not what it means. And we saw this even with the presidents of our university, like, well, context matters. Like, no, no, it
Right.
doesn't. This is leading to violence. So it's not
Yeah.
just free speech and the right to protest. This is calling for violence and hiding it in these statements of misplaced who is the oppressor and who is suppressed. Like I actually believe in free Gaza from Hamas. I mean,
Right.
the insanity of people's stupidity on what they know about what they're protesting for, because they need an identity, they need a purpose, and there's awful things going around the world, and we should be fighting for those things. And
Yeah.
America is a superpower because we do stand up for freedom, human rights, democracy, things like that.
Even though you have covered this a lot and you covered it on this show, I want to go back to a point you said. There is no genocide in the Palestinian area in the Gaza
Right.
Strip. So how on earth, given everything that we see in the news, how on earth can you say that? And yet here you are, by the way, an expert speaking on this. So
Yeah.
firsthand knowledge. Let's go.
Yeah. So I say it based on one, not analyzing Gaza Health Ministry numbers or anything that Hamas says. I analyze it from a objective analysis of all available data, going there on the ground and interviewing everybody from the prime minister, the head of the IDF, to division commanders in the field, to the people issuing out aid. Uh, that collected, that's how I can say that there is not the intent, right? So in order to have genocide, according to the Genocide Convention, it is very prescriptive. It isn't a
Mm.
pejorative like war on drugs. Like, no. Genocide has a very defined definition of both intent and acts. So you have to have
Okay.
the intent to eradicate a people, a religion, a culture, everything, and then have the acts. So you have to have the direct and attribution to intent. And if Israel was trying to genocide the people in Gaza, or trying to do a genocide at all, they're the
Mhm.
worst nation to ever attempt it in the history of genocides, right? And
Right.
there's only been a few documented genocides, right? You have Rwanda, Holocaust, Czech, Srebrenica, like all of
Mm.
these, where there is actually like commanders' intent, written orders, written acts, acts like taking all the babies, like we've seen in Ukraine, and trying to move them out of the country and give them to Russians so they never know they were Ukrainian. That's a genocidal act, but you have to
Mm.
have the documented intent. None of that is present in Israel, and it's actually the inversion that I was talking about. My documentation from now 6 visits into Israel, 5 of those into Gaza, is at the complete opposite of genocide, where you have
Mm.
a genocidal organization in Hamas, not only who tried to genocide Israeli civilians, women, children, elderly, you name it, on October 7th, they're trying to eradicate their own population. And they say it by saying they need the death of their children, their women, everybody to achieve their political goal in the afterlife, the destruction of Israel. But from like, look, if you just want to say, is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? That is
Yeah.
a resounding no by all acts. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, Pete, they've
Mm.
fed an American Israeli operation, that Israel is securing, has fed more than 12 million meals directly to Gazan civilians. I don't see how that's genocidal, because one of the the farce of the International Criminal Court case is that Israel was using starvation as a weapon starting on October 7th, according to them. And although there was only about 20-day period where the gates were closed and aid wasn't rushing into the enemy's population, and that was mainly because those sites were on fire because of what Hamas had just done. But the 100,000 trucks, the 25,000 trucks of aid during the last ceasefire, now the 12 million plus food. Like, if Israel has the intent to eradicate the population of Gaza, they're the worst nation and incompetent at that. It's just, there's not the intent nor the acts. There's actually the opposite. And then, we've covered in the past, even in the warfare, right? So, people like Piers Morgan will throw the numbers of children killed and things like that as in, like, this is the evidence of
Mm.
genocide. Look, okay, so that takes out all one, the where you're getting your data, the
Yeah.
context of how you're saying who is a combatant, who is a non-combatant. Hamas, yes, it is 50% people basically below 18 in the population of Gaza, because of, for many reasons, because of the poverty and like there's so many elements to that, but you and I have studied more than one war. So to tell what is a combatant and what is a non-combatant, to understand what Hamas built in Gaza and the
Yeah.
strategy it's using to get civilians killed, and how there isn't a military building in Gaza. Hamas is under the civilians, is under the hospitals. I mean, they just
Right.
killed, like, the senior commander in Gaza was in a hospital complex in a tunnel they built, which took a very long time to build, a tunnel complex underneath the European hospital in southern Gaza. And they got the top commander, Yahya Sinwar's brother, Mohammed Sinwar, under a hospital. Like, all these
Yeah.
things, all the genocide people who yell genocide, they just want to somehow, they're biased. They've already come to a conclusion based on their own, like, well, I've seen it on my phone, which is a
Right.
big part of this, right? So it's hard for me to convince people with facts, right? Facts, when they see, rightfully so, the awful travesty, the actual humanitarian crisis that's going on in Gaza, and they
Yeah.
immediately attribute to Israel is doing this, and Israel is doing it on purpose, which are, again, not the truth. Israel has done more, and I've said this in the past, I still believe it on my, has done more to try to protect an enemy's population than any military under any similar context, although there's not.
Mhm.
They've done more to feed an enemy's population during a war than any military in history. So I think that there is no genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds pretty clear. And then I guess the other side is, and you've talked a little bit about this in that last response, but how do we codify legally, is Hamas, can Hamas commit genocide because they're not a nation? Is Palestinian in a lot of regards? I mean, we don't recognize Palestine as a nation. Can they commit genocide, or is that going to the flag of terrorism? Can you help me? I don't understand what the answer is to that. So help me understand when they cross the line, and who holds them accountable and how.
Right. No, it's a great question. Like the courts that we're talking about, the ICC, right? Even the ideal, or the ICJ, right? So the ICJ is the one who heard the South African case. Well, Palestine is not a state, and it shouldn't be at the time when both political representations of both the West Bank and Gaza want to eradicate and won't recognize their neighbor as right to exist. But you're right. You can't declare a genocide in accordance with the Genocide Convention if you're not, a party that can be brought to these courts that were set up, like the ICJ, the ICC, which are really relatively new institutions. But this is the rise of the non-state actor, and what Gaza was, right? Gaza's not the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. Most people can't even tell you that difference of the sheer geography. The Hamas and the Palestinian Authority hate each other. They went to war, and all of these elements. You're right. From my term, it's a genocidal act, which then you could
Mm,
say, okay, yes, what October 7th, the targeting of civilians, the attempt to eradicate complete villages of every individual, and they killed not just the people, they killed every dog, every
mm,
cow. Like, they were gruesome in what they were doing in these villages in southern Israel. And those were genocidal acts that they recorded themselves, which is, again, when you go to intent and how you attribute intent, right? You have written orders, you have all the other evidence, right? And this is
yeah.
when South Africa brought this case to the ICJ and wanted the ICJ to rule on the genocide. The ICJ refused to rule. All they ruled was that, which I don't agree is true, and I'm again, that's I won't get into the legalness of it, that South Africa had the right to bring a case to the ICJ for Palestine. It's crazy where we're at.
Yeah.
But you're right. It would be hard to say how, what is Gaza, what is Hamas. Of course, it
Right.
was a self-governed area that Israel disengaged from in 2005. They started launching rockets at Israel, so Israel put up a wall, built the Iron Dome, started searching things that were going into Gaza. So they, started not allowing them to have a naval invasion, things like that. But
Yeah.
it makes it for hard people to have these frameworks. Like, when this is why it's more clear to say Israel as a nation recognized by everybody as a member of the United Nations is not committing genocide against Hamas, against Gaza and the people of Gaza. It's not trying to eradicate the people. It's trying to destroy Hamas as a political and military organization. And even if Hamas threw up its hands today and said, we give up, then you would go through reconciliation and Israel would stop operations, lethal operations, right?
And this has been true since day one. If Hamas surrendered unconditionally, the fighting stops, at least
Abs-
for this particular intifada.
ab-
And
Absolutely. Yep.
as long as there's will in the enemy to fight, especially for Israel, they're forced to fight. Like you said, this is a seven front war. They've got multiple places openly saying that they want to destroy the country and eradicate them using nuclear power. All of this stuff is there. We haven't even talked about Iran yet, but that is the reality. Is it fair to say that Hamas has committed genocide against Palestinians more than Israel has? And can you even say that? I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you say that
No,
legitimately?
I mean, so it is Hamas that has subjugated the people of Gaza, right? So
Okay,
the fact that Hamas are the five leaders of Hamas are all billionaires. The ones in Gaza were multimillionaires, and the
right.
people's in the infrastructure, the potable water, the access to food, the reliance on international aid, the economy, like all of it is like that's not Israel's fault. When you
Right.
have billions of dollars from the international community to start prosperity, to start a better life, is siphoned by the exact people subjugating the population and
Mm,
radicalizing the population, right? So this is the which people won't recognize. There is a difference in what can be achieved when you radicalize a population from birth, right? I've seen
yeah.
Palestinian Sesame Street. I've seen the books that the UNRWA has issued. Like it's diabolical
Yeah, it
what
is.
Hamas has done to the population. And now you have seen, and we could get to what we see now. You have people within the population deciding and that there is enough fracture of Hamas's power to rise up, to
Mm,
protest, to volunteer to fight. You have fighters now volunteering to fight Hamas, and there, some people are, of course, jumping on the hate bandwagon, saying that's a bad thing. Although historically, it's what we've done in wars from World War II, and I mean beyond, is arming somebody to fight the enemy you're trying to defeat. You see that Hamas doesn't have control of the aid because it was using starvation as a weapon, right? That inversion of Israel is
right.
using starvation. Well, how is Israel using starvation as a weapon if it's flooding food in there? And then they go
Yeah.
to the statistical war. But Hamas has lost the ability to control the food getting to people, to tax it, to use it as a leverage to subjugate the people. So we're seeing that, but I no, they weren't genociding the people because they wanted to radicalize the population in order to achieve this war that they wanted. And this was the actualization of their war, right? The Hamas Charter, both the original one and the updated one, views as the eradication of the Zionist or the Israeli people on Israel, right? Like from the river to the sea means there is no more Israel or Jewish people living
Right.
in that area.
Yeah.
And Hamas radicalized and instituted this radicalization process, but also subjugated the people so they couldn't have a way up. And there's some similarities in the Palestinian Authority where the only way to rise in that society is to demonstrate hate and willingness to martyr yourself for the actual cause in the afterlife, which is the destruction of Israel.
Yeah. And so we have a lot of people wondering where the borders are going to be. And I know we can't get too far ahead of this thing because while we're talking, there's guaranteed news breaking about something that'll be the opposite of what we say.
Right.
But one of the outcomes of this is the cessation of any kind of Palestinian state in any kind of form. I mean, you know, there are people from places who no longer can go there. South Africa is trying to sort this kind of thing out now. Um, there's a lot of places that Zimbabwe is now Zimbabwe. It was Rhodesia. There's Rhodesians that walk the earth and cannot go home because their home does not exist. And it's always been, once this thing started, possible that Palestine will cease to exist as a state of any kind. And I suppose there's folks that would like it to be the other way around, where Israel doesn't exist. This is a long way of saying this. Is détente even possible in Palestine's world, like where they exist on that coast? Is that possible at all?
So there's a lot of history there, Pete. A lot of
Yeah,
war, a lot of to include a lot of wars, right? I
yeah,
I, I live in the world of wars, and when you start a war, whether you're five Arab nations attacking Israel in 1967, or you're Gaza and Hamas on October 7th, when you start a war, you lose a war. There's consequences. You
yeah,
lose borders. You lose the ability to govern your population. So there's that element. I mean, the ideal of a Palestinian state, again, the inversion of the truth is that Israel was the hurdle to that. And there have
Right.
been many US presidents, from Clinton to Carter to Bush, that who said that it isn't Israel that is the hurdle to forming a Palestinian state. And
Right.
again, if people are interested in that, learn the geography and the difference between the West Bank and Gaza. So does this war complicate the ability to achieve a Palestinian state? Did it? Absolutely. Did it?
Yeah.
Did the Islamic regime in Iran, who funded Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, want there to be a Palestinian? Absolutely not. It would take away the cause of the destruction of Israel, right? The multi-front for the Islamic regime, the ring of fire cause to destroy Israel. But it hasn't been Israel that has been the roadblock, and that's not John Spencer saying that. I mean,
Right.
Bill
That's
Clinton
fact.
said that very. I mean, even Hillary Clinton has said, like, look, we have gone to bat. But for me, as a war perspective for Gaza, you start a war, as in Hamas, the at one point elected and then never had an election again, the ruling political faction of a area. You start a war, you lose a war, you can't be rewarded for that. And
Right.
this is the whole, again, Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, who control, is the Palestinian Authority leader, who again was elected once and never had an election again for 20 years. Can't expect the outcome of October 7th to lead to a Palestinian state that includes Gaza, and it's just insanity.
Yeah.
If October 7th becomes Palestinian Independence Day, there would be no stop in the cycle of violence in that region at all. It would validate the October 7th style of attack to achieve political gains. It would be awful for the region and the world.
Yeah. Boy. Yeah. It's true. If is Israel willing? It's just so really silly, but I'm going to ask this question for the audience sake.
Yeah.
Is Israel willing to live in peace in the Middle East, or are they this pugnacious war country? And look, there's legitimate concerns about Netanyahu. I struggle with having people line out where the politics stop and the conflict starts, because it's very tough to do that, because a lot of people hate Netanyahu because of the party he represents. But could Israel live over in Israel and cooperate with the vast majority of its neighbors if they allowed it?
So look, I don't speak for Israel, the
Of
Israel
course.
government, or anything. I study history, and we seem to be living in the world where comedians become revisionist history experts, right? So they
Yeah.
invent the history of Israel, and
Yes.
unlike anybody else, and you talk about the foundations and the wrongs after being attacked and all this. I actually, from John Spencer's opinion, of visiting
Yeah.
Israel many times over many years, the only thing I've ever gotten from the Israeli people is that they want peace. Just leave us alone.
Same.
So that's the only thing. So after you, and how many wars do you have to study, from the Yom Kippur War, the 6 Day War, the first Intifada, the second Intifada? Just leave us alone. But these are enemies who are trying to eradicate the state of Israel. But you have seen peace, right? Israel
Yeah.
signed a peace agreement with Egypt, with many, with Arab nations. You had Arab nations recently defending Israel when it was attacked by Iran in April of 2024 and in October of 2024. You had
Right.
Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Absolutely, it is possible to have peace in the Middle East, but people have to acknowledge that these regimes, these terror regimes, namely Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, uh, all backed by one head of the snake, the
Mm.
Islamic regime in Iran, they don't want peace. And their goal is to keep the fight going for as long as they want. So if they want to put that under the banner of the Palestinian cause, although, Hamas is not Hezbollah, right? These are different, as
Yep.
Sunni versus Shia,
So
different,
crazy.
it's different religions and different cultures, but they all are united under one banner, which is the
Yeah.
destruction of Israel.
Yeah. And they're open about it, and they're willing to use nuclear wars, which just slides us right over to Iran.
Absolutely. Yep.
This has been coming for a long time. The timing of it's really clear on what the messages are being sent. And there's a lot of messages that are being sent, and folks tend to say psyop. It's really an information operation in all of these cases. But Iran didn't want to do a deal, and so when that timeline stopped, the opposition to them started. And I guess the thing I would ask you is everybody starts with that's it. It's World War III. It's starting now. We're going to go to nuclear war. Do you think is that obviously we don't know what's going to happen? And again, cut to somebody doing something insane right now as we're talking. But is this the beginning of World War III?
I think it's no.
Okay.
So let's be clear. No,
Yeah.
this is had Iran broke out and achieved a nuclear weapon, then we would have a global political situation where you would have the potential for a much greater war, right? Because
Right.
if Iran got a nuclear weapon, then all the people it threatens, because it starts with death to America, that's their chant, death to Israel, and then there are many other people, as you know, on the ideal for an Islamic caliphate that the Islamic regime
Yep.
has. So you'd have other nations in the Middle East who would say, "Well, I need a nuclear weapon now." You would see a
Right.
proliferation. And it was actually interesting, all the data that all the misinformation agents that are rampant this morning and yesterday, all the data they want to push aside on what the Islamic regime nuclear program was doing, right? So they had the IAEA, right? The people who make this call for the first time in 20 years vote within themselves and say, yes, Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon in violation of the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Act, right? For the first time in 20 years, they did this decision, even though like you had the U.S. Commander of Strategic Command saying that Iran was 1 week from building a bomb, and you had
Right.
all these people saying how close they were to it, but also from a war perspective, the ballistic program, like what Iran, of course, wanted a nuclear weapon, and despite the failed American foreign policy, like the JCPOA and the sanctions relief and billions of dollars, allowing them to go to amplify their oil economy, to get more money, to fund these terrorist regimes trying to destroy Israel and to upset the Middle East.
Yeah.
But the missile program is also being discounted, right? So 2 weeks ago, Iran tested a 2 kiloton weapon, not a nuclear weapon, but a
Yeah.
bomb, right? So, and
Yeah.
the Hiroshima was 15 ton, just to put it
Right.
in perspective. They also have been trying to get to an intercontinental ballistic missile. Why do they want an ICBM? Why do they want that? It's because of what they say, death to America.
Right.
This was a preemptive act because Israel says they had intelligence that Iran was negotiating even with President Trump, not straightforward. They had a secret program where they were trying to rush both their nuclear and ballistic program to the point where you were at no return, right? Because kind of a North Korea scenario where I got it. What are you going to do about it? Because now we're in a position of actual escalation into nuclear war because I have what I need. So Israel did a preemptive strike. President Trump gave Iran in this latest round, right? So this is where I think the Islamic regime miscalculated. After October 7th, we live in a different world in the Middle East. After, this is not the same U.S. administration. So I think Iran thought they were going to be able to do what they've always done, which is just get more time to get to where they wanted to get to, which is, I already have it. What are you going to do now? The president gave them 60 days in the last round and sent Witkoff and did all these things. And the 61st day is when Israel strike. So it wasn't like that. There wasn't all diplomatic measures, but Israel, like it did in what was it in Iraq and Syria, took a very clear threat to its existence measure. And this is the preemptive strike that they've done and the outcomes, right? I'm a writer of history somewhat. I'm not a historian. I'm a war researcher, and I have to keep throwing out what I'm writing on because Israel keeps upsetting like military history. So they launched this preemptive strike, right? Yeah. And they put up almost every aircraft they have, over 200 aircraft, to include F-35 strike, eyes, the most advanced aircraft in the world. And in a matter of hours, eliminated 20 senior IRGC commanders, the head of IRGC, the head of the Quds Force, which you and I will know from Iraq and Afghanistan, the people training, arming, equipping the people that were trying to kill Americans. The 9 nuclear scientists were eliminated.
Right.
The Natanz nuclear site, all of Iran's air defenses, most of their ballistic missile capabilities to do a retaliation. In just a matter of hours, in waves, now we're at 5th wave, Israel did this preemptive strike. But as again, and then we're trying to dispel disinformation. with a very clear, transparent objective for their strike, their campaign.
Right.
People call it a war, fine. Their clear goal is to roll back for the world Iran's nuclear program, as well as their ballistic program that they were developing missiles specifically to attack Israel, to roll that back. And they did it. They're not done doing it, but that's where we're at. Like, to have a clear goal, as we all know, right? Most people have
Yeah.
a clear goal in the beginning, and then the goal changes, and then that where they start to fall apart on their strategy to achieve their goal because they just change the goalpost, right? I want to build a democratic nation. Like, okay, like
Yeah.
you and I have talked many times, like you don't understand the culture, you don't like all this stuff.
Oh my gosh.
But you changed the goal from overthrow that regime that's doing awful things to I'm going to build something new here.
Right.
Israel's goal is to roll back the nuclear program for for a very long time, and they're doing that. I don't think they're done
Mm,
now. And this is where again I just came off of Canadian TV and I was on
mm,
Indian TV where they call it tit for tat. They put the operations on parity, like Israel with a clear goal, overwhelming success so far, to Iran's retaliation. So you have the supreme leader of Iran going, I'm going to eliminate the Zionist regime, and then I'm going to strike the Americans for helping them. And they've launched what missiles they can at apartment building complexes, and they were probably aiming for like the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, which is their version of the Pentagon, basically. But they didn't
right.
hit it because they don't have precision, right?
Right.
You have Israel eliminating apartment not buildings, apartment rooms on
Right.
certain floors where that general was having a meeting that they fooled the generals to have a meeting in. And you have Iran eliminating apartment complexes with no military. They just missed their target is what they did. And they were
Right.
aiming for something, but they're not parity here. There's not moral equivalence here. You have Israel doing the world a favor, one, taking its own survival in its own hand, but the entire world has been trying to get the Islamic regime to stop its nuclear proliferation program or nuclear enrichment program to get to a bomb, to include up to 100 bombs. And the
Yeah.
entire world has failed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to echo your point here, we're talking about really surgical strikes, and
Absolutely.
even surgery can be a little messy at the point of contact, but they're not taking out random targets. They're specifically targeting. And by the way, on the intel side, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is my world. This isn't a thing. I love it when commanders like, can you go to this area and go do what you did over there in about 10 days? And I'm like, no,
No,
no, I
this
can't.
takes
No,
years, right?
it takes forever. Yeah. And so if you catch a
I
couple of
mean,
breaks, maybe you can do it faster, but
yeah, and
it's
even this Mossad,
remarkable.
yeah, what
Yeah.
so I covered what Ukraine did during Operation Spider's Web. I'm sure you did as
Yeah.
well. With the drones, building the drones inside of a country, beyond the country's defenses, hitting
Yeah.
something very valuable. So now you have the Mossad, and I'm sure they weren't talking, but do something similar where Mossad agents were on the ground in
Hmm.
Iran, building drones that they launched at a certain moment to hit ballistic missile or air defense systems within the country. So there's so much going on here in the evolution of the character of warfare. We've talked about this. It's always evolving,
Oof.
right?
Yeah.
From intelligence capabilities like the walkie-talkie pager situation that they did against Hezbollah to something like this, but
Yeah.
to fool the IRGC, right? So this isn't a terrorist army. This is a nation state army um, defense apparatus to fool the generals to have a meeting and then to be able to kill those generals with extreme precision
Boy.
from 2,000 kilometers away. Like the sheer capability you need to be able to do that from an intelligence and military capability is insane. And
Yeah.
it's hard to write about it because it keeps blowing your mind on what they're able to do.
I mean, yeah, when I talk about the collection side,
Yeah.
you have people like me who are field people and they're very specific and they're great at what they do. If you have great operations people and great analysts all working together in harmony, man, you can do anything. And I guess just to amplify this, when the Spectre comes out, um, Iran's going to look over every shoulder.
Yeah.
Which person was it that under, because it doesn't have to be a Mossad agent directly. They may have an agent for their agent, and it gets really complicated, and it goes into the world of Berlinery. But like, imagine DC trying to sort out who's an agent and who they're an agent for. Like, it's impossible because it's just so murky. Which is a great area to operate in if you're comfortable in that zone, which people like me feel people. That's what we do. And so
And
I'm some guy from Pennsylvania who's got a rug company, but really I'm somebody else.
yeah, let's cover that, right? Because
Okay,
I
please.
was just talking to Piers Morgan, not talking to him, but talking at him, where he's like, well, if Israel can do this to Hezbollah in Lebanon, right? The pager operation, the strategic strikes to take
Yeah.
down their complete leadership hierarchy, and now has shown to be able to do it against a nation state, right? To be able to take out 20 senior commanders, the head of the IRGC, the head of the missile command, like all this. If they can do that in a matter of days, then why are they doing what they're doing
Oh
in
yeah.
Gaza? Like,
Yeah.
okay, let's talk about that, right? So you
Yeah.
have Lebanon, it's a multicultural Christian and
Yep.
many other national, religions and ethnicities. It's diverse. It is ripe for intelligence infiltration, right? To
Totally.
infiltrate the society, to infiltrate the organizations, and same thing with Iran, right? The Islamic regime is a fraction. You have millions of Iranians that want nothing to do with the Islamic regime. They just want to live their lives. They're not actually Islamic. I mean, it's just so many elements of that is,
Yep.
again, ripe for infiltration and intelligence operation. Now take Gaza, right? This small area of 2 million, and this is not like hyperbole, radicalized population in which
Right.
Israel disengaged on purpose and took out human intelligence over the years, right? So they disengaged in 2005, but there were wars and flares up. There was a wall, there's the Iron Dome, and it's a radicalized population that Israel used containment strategy against, right? It didn't have a giant intelligence collection portfolio against Hamas in Gaza. They knew Hamas was digging tunnels. Hamas was trying to fool the world that it just needed more humanitarian aid and everything would get better, right? So they had fooled the world that they weren't going to do these big, this attack and all this stuff. But to not understand the differences in societies and the radicalization and the diversity of societies, which are ripe for infiltration, whether that's through businesses or actors, like you said, like
Yeah.
even double agents and triple agents and all
Oh
that
my
stuff.
gosh. Right.
Israel wasn't doing that in Gaza. So it's an actual acknowledgement that Israel had left and had a containment toward really a rocket diplomacy. Hamas would launch rockets. We could knock those down, things like that with Gaza. And how different, if somebody doesn't understand, that is between Lebanon and especially Iran, where you have, massive populations willing to sacrifice and fight for their own freedoms. And we've seen this, right, during the Masa Amini Women
Yeah.
Life Freedom Acts. Like, it's a very not friendly to the regime society where you could infiltrate easily in many ways. And it's also somewhat of an open society. It is able to travel. There are amazing Iranian scientists and education and business and all this stuff. You don't have that in Gaza.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And just and we can get off this, and I want to get into these other conflicts too. But the speed with which these operations happen, they seem to appear out of nowhere. But like we talked about a few minutes ago, they're built on the backs of years and years of work, lots of failure, people getting kicked out of country, that kind of thing. And triple agents, they're a real thing. And there's a fight. Everything's a competition. Like, we can never forget this. And so if I'm running my rug store operation, which is a legitimate operation, and that's my cover to do things, and I'm just connecting people, I'm triple agenting all the time. And I don't really care what these two sides do, because my goal is something bigger and longer term. And so you can think about World War II, when America and Great Britain, all of a sudden the reveal came, and you're like, oh shit, Big Joe over there, he owns all of Eastern Europe now. Fuck, we didn't think about that because we were busy winning a war. I don't know if these things go together 100%, but there's always other competition going on. There's always other areas. And when you have this murky intel atmosphere, nation states want to take advantage of that. So there's other things that power is being exchanged all the
Absolutely.
time. So that's the main thing to remember with this. Anything you want to say on that, or do you want to move into
No,
Azerbaijan or
I
India?
think you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. And war does create power vacuums and power opportunities that there's always actors trying to profit or gain it, not just in financial, but
right.
also from the macro level, right? So the geopolitical, like China's like, well, what can I gain out of this, right? So like when
Right.
how low Iran was having to sell its oil to China using a ghost fleet and all this stuff, they're profiting from you know, there's that level and
Yep.
act down to that individual level, like we've seen in Gaza, right? Like we've experienced. There's always
Yeah.
actors who's like, oh, I'll take some power. I'll be the power.
Yeah.
They're not good guys they're,
No.
at all, but they're trying to profit in power from the situation that's caused by this instability.
Yeah. 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 So, which you want to talk about? India, or do you want to
You
talk about
can't.
Azerbaijan?
Oh, I mean, India's probably the one that's been missed the
Okay.
most. Where you had Pakistan, which has been a dubious friend of America during the war on terrorism, right? So this is where Osama bin Laden was hiding. This is where, as you've lived more than I have, where all the Taliban and the Haqqani network would just go over to
Oh yeah.
Pakistan until it was fighting season, and they had a safe haven for the entire time. But from an India perspective, Pakistan, a nuclear armed country, has been sending Pakistan ISI, so military intelligence backed, trained, funded terrorists from within India, like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mahdi, others, into India to do terrorist attacks. I walked the ground of the 2008 Mumbai attacks, and I'm
Mm,
about to finish. We've written a lot about it, but I'm going to write it again. That was it shook the world. It was India's 9/11. Well, on April 26th, it happened again, right? So the same group, Lashkar-e-Taiba, backed by the ISI, launched an attack into northern India, in the Kashmir area, and killed 26. It targeted 26 civilians based on their ethnicity and religion, and did this terrorist attack. So India responded by hitting terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. Despite now you have basically, so they attacked 9 sites after that terrorist attack on April 26th in Pakistan. Terrorist
wow.
sites, again, clear objectives with basically precision, like we were talking about. Well, Pakistan responded by attacking India's military and escalated it to a full out war between two nuclear armed countries that you know thankfully only lasted 4 days. India called it Operation Sindoor, because once Pakistan's military, which backs the terrorist organization, but jumped on the bandwagon and then attacked both Indian civilian and military sites with drones. So they launched like 100 drones at
Right.
India, which India was able to defeat. You've had the biggest dogfight probably in modern history. You had over 100 jets in the sky
Jeez.
between India and Pakistan. So nuclear armed, but they're jets, like F-16s. Well, no, they didn't use their F-16s, but Rafales and other highly advanced jets launching missiles at each other or at sites out of the range. So they're not shooting at each other. But one of the biggest dogfights probably in modern history.
Wow.
And then, so Pakistan attacked India. India then attacked Pakistan military installations. So over 11, and demonstrated overwhelming military superiority to de-escalate. So they attacked Pakistani military sites to say, look, you just upped this a level, and India demonstrated military superiority. Then Pakistan asked for, okay, let's stop this. And India agreed to stop, not necessarily do a ceasefire, although people love that word, stop
Right.
the operation, but continue to be in a defensive posture and the opportunity. I wrote about it because it was really an amazing one, undercovered. Like, you have two nuclear armed countries now going at it for the first time since the 1990s. Very sensitive, but you also had a Indian leadership saying, look, we're done with this blackmail, this nuclear blackmail, which I think is really considerable, as we watch what Russia has done by violating the all international norms of sovereign borders, of the law of war. All this saying, well, look, I have a nuclear weapon. We don't want this to go nuclear, do we? India just showed some leadership there, going, look, we don't. Of course, nobody wants the nuclear war, and it's reckless to rattle the nuclear saber in the Putin style. But no more of this terrorist proxy war against our civilians, and put their foot down on a new Indian strategic policy. And there is some U.S. involvement, right? Because U.S. just
Sure.
says that both India and Pakistan are strong allies, because Pakistan helped during the global war on terrorism, while also doing this double game of funding, giving safe haven, and deploying terrorists. So it's pretty incredible. But this is a new world we're living in, and India just put their foot down. I think it's an undercover war. I'm going again to
Oh,
study some of their technologies, right? So some of the India about 5 years ago decided, look, I'm done with kind of international military industrial complex kind of game, and they decided they would develop India only weapons. So through coordination with Israel and other nations, they started basically signing agreements where they would have technologies, but they would build them in India and then build India only products. So they went from like 14% India made, and then the rest is from other countries, to like 65%
wow.
India made. And they demonstrated this because, Pakistan, most people don't know this, is a Chinese backed nation, right? So most of Pakistan's military, although they have F-16s, which they're restricted on when they can use them, but it's a mainly Chinese backed army. So what we also saw here was a demonstration of Indian, Israeli, and a couple other country backed technologies against Chinese systems. And you saw the overwhelming superiority of made in India, and they have a couple other technologies, and they do have a Russian air defense kind of equipment as well. But the sheer dominance of Chinese weapons, which is our main, kind of what we say in our national security documents, our main competitor in the world, which nobody wants war, but you deter war by showing one overwhelming dominance and military capability and the willingness to use it. So this was a great, and what I'll be studying is how did India dominate Pakistan Chinese technologies so conclusively, and like this is where Pakistan deployed, which is what we've seen Iran doing, like immediately started deploying misinformation because of the new world we live in on X and other social media, where a lie can travel the world before the truth puts on its pants. But there's this other thing that we have that kind of backs the truth, is like satellite imagery, like where Pakistan was saying we shot down 6 Indian aircraft. Like, okay, show me one wreckage. Like,
Mm.
and we have like things like Maxar, like that will do it irrelevant of other nations, and it can show satellite imagery. Like, okay, where's so it's fascinating. So I'll be on the ground to study that war, but a 4-day war undercovered by international media because they're so fascinated with the misinformation coming out of Gaza,
Yeah.
and vilifying Israel, trying to demonize Israel, that they're like, yeah, there's this war going on over in India and
Yeah.
Pakistan.
Between two nuclear powers. Just
Right.
just some things for people to understand. Pakistan and China share a border. Obviously, China and India share a border, and
Yep.
so when you hear about China backing things, they've got a lot of countries and a lot of borders, and it's helpful to have friends. And so when you hear these things, this is how they view their own regional politics, and they get to have these relationships. You want to talk about a complex border? You can look up the border between Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. It's just a triple swirl of these countries, and they're all interbound, and they're right next door to China. Look, those countries probably won't fight. It's very mountainous over there. But the point is that whole world, we don't pay attention to it, but it's complex, and these places are trying to survive within their area, but they all have neighbors. And
So
just
I had this,
imagine if, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
I had
please.
this new saying. Now you just key to me this new saying, which is for me, is like, absolutely, geopolitics is complex.
Yeah,
Each nation's relationships, allies, defense
yeah,
contracts, all complex. You know what's not complex? Terrorism. And
mm,
I'm a hawk when it comes to terrorism. Like, look, if your
yeah,
national policy is the use of terrorism as a proxy warfare against your enemies, then you're wrong. Um,
yeah,
and then you have these misinformation agents that confuse foreign policy. And nations, of course, do espionage and they do all
yeah,
kinds of things. That's not terrorism, and backing and building terrorist organizations and deploying them into a nation in the hope of plausible deniability when there absolutely is none. Absolutely, Pete. Geopolitics is complex, and each nation,
yeah,
especially that shares border. But what's not complex is nation state-backed terrorism, like
yeah,
terrorist states. So the Islamic regime in Iran, Pakistan are, like, without a doubt, state sponsors of terrorism.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, boy, there's so much more to say, but I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about Azerbaijan too, because there's
Yeah.
another thing that's hidden in plain sight. There's so much more to talk about that. So please come back, but let's talk about Azerbaijan.
Yeah. So in 2020, there was what were called the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, which is dubious because of the Soviet, the breakup of the Soviet Union, and you had the formations of many nations and agreed upon borders. There was an area between Armenia and Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh, by many. There was the first Nagorno-Karabakh war in the 1990s of, again, of, okay, these regions that nobody agrees to are really hard for people to deal with. And in 2020, Azerbaijan was provoked into launching basically a war, a second Nagorno-Karabakh war. I was on the ground in 2020 because that was really the first war where we saw the use of drones and suicide drones, both Israeli and Turkish, right? The TB2 Bayraktar that's been kind of widely covered, especially in Ukraine and other places, was really highlighted by media in that war. But they also got it wrong on like what was the most dominant feature of that war in 2020. It wasn't a drone war. It was actually like a lot of soldiers humping up mountainous terrain under the cover of night and advanced technologies to achieve their goal of whether to seize terrain or whatever it was. So I was on the ground in 2021 studying one of the urban battles, this cliffside urban battle where these basic versions of Rangers, Azerbaijani Rangers, scaled cliffs to infiltrate the city. And I was on the ground studying and wrote the case study about that book. But in 2023, Azerbaijan launched again another offensive against this kind of self-declared area, which is Armenian-backed, also Russian peacekeepers, supposedly peacekeepers in the area in 2023, and the world barely covered it, right? So the world barely covered the operation that was happening in September of 2023 because they're, quickly, as you know, October 7th happened. They didn't cover it, but the area that used to be called Nagorno-Karabakh doesn't exist anymore. It was already internationally recognized as Azerbaijan. And I try not to do politics, and there's a lot of deep politics, especially in Armenian history and other people's histories about, well, what is this region? Whose is it? And that's really complex. But I've been on the ground in Azerbaijan recently to try to study more about what happened in 2020, because it was the biggest military operation at that time that had happened in a long time. But then you have this 2023 operation, but you also had, what was the result of the operation, right? So you had this area that was autonomous for a long time, but they had kicked all the Azerbaijanis out, and it was mainly Armenians who were claiming, and they had filled this area. So Azerbaijan, again, wars changed things, won these two wars, and now all of that is recognized like it originally was as Azerbaijani. But then the Azerbaijan said, okay, look, if this was your home before, you can still live there. And they put up this website where the former people of this area could come back to their homes, just register with the government. And they didn't. So they weren't forced to displace, they displaced. And now it's Azerbaijan. It's hard to cover wars without getting into the political, aspect. But I am studying the actual military operations, both in the 2020 and 2023, because I think there was a lot lost there from the actual technologies, tactics that were dominant against Russian-backed forces in the certain upgrades that Azerbaijan, kind of like we saw in Pakistan and in India, right? Azerbaijan had invested heavily in modernizing its militaries, and the Armenian-backed forces had basically 1970s Soviet equipment, and they weren't upgrading all these elements of electronic warfare, anti-drone technologies, basically, tank, top down the tank. We saw this as a precursor to the Ukrainian war, and a lot of lessons were being learned. I don't know if you remember, but people putting cages on top of their tanks. That was coming out of Azerbaijan's war against in the second Nagorno-Karabakh, because top-down drones were being so effective against tanks, which are vulnerable on the top. So people started putting cope cages on top of their tanks. We actually saw it going into Israeli tanks with that on top of their tanks because of the threat of drones going into after October 7th. Because of the sheer scale of these wars, a lot of these lessons get missed, or what matters, which is really fascinating to look at kind of the evolutions of militaries, is where they grab on to lessons to say, okay, I'm changing my military because of this lesson.
Right.
Even if they had the ideal before the war, but like, aha, this is what we've seen in Ukraine, right? Ukraine has gone on for so long and evolved so from defensive, urban-centric defensive wars to basically static trench line minefields that go on for hundreds of miles. It's evolved to where any military leader in any country go, like in Ukraine, I'm going to make this changes here. without all the nuances and context of, well, why has it
Yeah,
evolved to that?
yeah. It's crazy. I don't know. A couple of years ago, I didn't publish it, but I wrote a story, like a short story about a single actor who was working, like hey, a privateer. Like hey, yeah, go do this, we'll fund it, but don't talk to us anymore about it. And in the story, this guy goes just south of Juarez and just equips, doesn't care if it's successful, just equips 1,000 drones with old RKG-3s to fly over the fence
Mm,
line,
mm.
and does it not controlled by GPS, but just by mechanical. And so they're going to fly a certain distance, let go of the RKG, which is, by the way, everybody, anti-tank grenade, small scale, right? And just all these tanks lined up in a line, and or do the same thing in San Diego, just south of there in Mexico, and just go fly over the top of the Teddy Roosevelt and drop a bunch of old like munitions. Just that attack is successful in the fact that you can do it, and it makes everybody realize, oh my gosh, everything is vulnerable to these things. Would it harm the Teddy Roosevelt? No, but that perception of what could happen, if
Absolutely.
they'd gotten lucky, it's terrifying.
We've seen, and this is, I mean, absolutely, the counter drone fight is also a southern border issue, right? So I
Right.
mean, you have the evolution of even fiber optic drones in Ukraine, both
Yeah.
sides using fiber optics because it defeats any electronic warfare
Right. Right.
countermeasure, right? But there's a limitation on distance. But for open
Sure.
terrain, it's very hard to defeat and very
Yeah.
lethal. Absolutely, and we've seen the rise on the southern border of drones. You also seen the rise of tunnels, right? So cartels actually learn from Hamas and Hezbollah and have increased the number of tunnels. Anywhere there's a new wall, you're going to have
Yeah.
people trying to go under that wall. Israel built an underground wall that was very effective against Gaza. Of course, then the enemy changes his tactics. Like, well, I'm not going to try to
Yeah.
tunnel underneath you anymore. I'm going to
Right.
just take a bulldozer and knock down your wall. Absolutely, these are
Yeah.
evolutions of enemy tactics that we have to be prepared for. And a lot of people are asking the question, what was just done to Russia by Ukraine? What was just done to Iran by Israel with this drones within a country hitting very valuable targets? The United States, and there's been a lot of hearings recently, is not prepared for that.
Right. Now, who is? I mean, it's a place as big as complex as I mean, oh my gosh, United States. It's crazy. Yeah, and you just need a tunnel to get under a wall, and now you're behind the electronic warfare thing.
Or
It's not
yeah,
hard to come up with
yeah.
comment. And oh, it's
You had Russian Pete, you had Russian semi drivers driving a Trojan horse of Ukrainian drones, not knowing what was in that semi truck. That's the level of intelligence infiltration that you could use the flows of a nation, right? So, how many
yeah,
semi trucks do we have on our streets? You had Russian semi truck drivers driving Ukrainian drones into their objectives without
of
knowing what was
course.
in their vehicle. So, you don't need a tunnel, or
Yeah,
a cross border or anything. If you're,
yeah,
well, but we have, I don't want to, to say we're not prepared. Like, we have some of the best, counterterrorism, law enforcement, port security in the world. But
right.
you have to continue to evolve and prepare, and the sensors that you need, all these things, to ensure that your national infrastructure is protected.
And you and I both know tits and $10,000 will get you almost any crime committed. I mean, it's just it's just a fact, right? And
I won't say that, Pete, but I'll take your word for it.
well, I mean, what I mean, like, there's a lot of ways around all the electronic stuff. There's always the human element,
Absolutely, you
and
can't have it.
humans want things,
Yep,
right?
active defense. You have
I
to
was being
be.
crass, but
Yeah. No, no, but it's legit. I mean, even I try not to do politics, but war is
right,
politics by other means.
yeah,
The immigration of hostile actors into the United States was a threat. Just in
yeah,
And there's been some people that do a lot of work on this. A Fahedin fighter, you don't need an e-tech. You just need a radicalized person
yep.
to come in illegally and do large. They just caught a guy, Pete, in Canada. They actually extradited him, a Pakistani in Canada who was planning to do the second 9/11 on a Jewish gathering in Brooklyn.
Oh,
And
yeah,
all he wanted was AK-47 and some explosives, and was trying to link up. Of course, he was talking to FBI agents with another fighter. And that's the level of nobody talks about the threats that are defeated, right? So
yeah,
we always talk
right,
about how we're vulnerable, but the amazing work of American law enforcement and Interpol and others to stop these people who can have great effect with mass casualty events, but they ones, luckily for us, some of them are really stupid and who they're talking to online and things like that. But the threats are real,
Yeah.
and there have been some major lapses in security, like allowing undocumented people with ill intent, not talking about the people that just want to work,
Right.
into the country. And they're, whether there's, you call them sleeper cells or self-radicalized or actual agents of another nation. I mean, that was, again, a Pakistani, maybe self-radicalized, but maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, and I can't elaborate on this, but even, I don't try to do any of this stuff, and all of a sudden, I know several people who are focused on the world of smuggling, and they teach me about how smuggling works. And a lot of these operations are blinked in and out of existence before they can even be detected, because you just need a couple of nodes.
Yeah.
And once you have the path figured out, it's essentially undetectable. And even if you do lose something, it's shrinkage. It's not the end of that operation. It's insane how easy it is to figure this out. There's always risk, but that risk is manageable by the reward, whether it's drugs or weapons or whatever it
Yeah.
is. It's essentially appears to be unstoppable. It just I don't
Yeah.
know.
You
It's luck.
can't forget the luck. Yeah, absolutely. Luck
Yeah,
plays into it, right? The one traffic stop for a guy that looks suspicious can have a
it really can.
exponential effect. And this is the layers, right? So this is why, I do city security, right? So urban security.
Yeah,
So this whole defund the police kind of initiative and all that stuff was hurting national security, because these are layers of
right.
homeland defense, right? Layers. It isn't just about the border, although that was a massive, basically, invasion, but you
Right.
have to have layers of defense to be able to catch these things at one point. And,
Yeah.
the luck of some of it is luck, some of it is technology, from license plate readers to gunshot detectors. I mean, you name it. Is it? We invest a lot in national
Yeah.
security. We also underinvest in homeland security, and
Mm,
that comes at a fault. And you have a lot of people that view it as, warmongering or something like that. No, I want my children safe from active shooters to human smuggling to all this. And you have to have the layers of, from local police,
yep.
community level police, up to national level federal employees, federal law enforcement, which is awful what
Yeah.
we've seen in California, in my own opinion, is people that, again, everybody can protest, but if you attack a federal law enforcement agent,
Right.
that's a crime and you should go to jail for it.
Yeah, yeah. If you damage property, if
Yeah.
you attack people with a weapon, whether it's a rock or fire or whatever it is, I mean, that nobody's talking about that. Protesting, of course, protesting vociferously. Ah, I'm really mad.
That's right.
All good, but you can't harm other people. You can't burn property down,
No.
kind of thing. Listen, I've had you for an hour, and I know how limited your time is. So thank you. And this is a fantastic episode. I really had a
Yeah, we
blast
covered a
talking to you.
lot. Covered a lot.
Yeah, we sure did. Anything you want to say about it? Otherwise, everybody else, before John wraps up, look down below. There's a link. And his work at the Modern War Institute is incredible. And if you want to learn about all these things, they've got a fantastic podcast. Just go look, do your work, and check out the sources, and you'll understand who John is and why I'm so stoked to have him on the show and to give us all this knowledge that he has. So thank you again, John, for that. Everybody go check out Modern War Institute. There's the link for the paper from April 2025. Go ahead and wrap it up, and then we'll get out of here.
Well, thanks, Pete. Thanks for following
Yep.
me. And you can also go to johnspenceronline.com or on X at Spencer Guard. Unfortunately, there's a lot of war going on, but the best thing that anybody can do is stay informed.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, let me wrap this up. I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Everybody else, hey, look at weekend show. I'll talk to you all soon.